am a partner in a law firm. I've been a partner in a law firm for about 17 years and I practice entertainment law. Basically, I'm a film finance lawyer. So I represent production companies here and in the States who are making movies here, all kinds of deals to do with putting feature films together. I have been in the UK since 1988 and I am allowed to be here because I was actually born in the UK. My father was English and I have both Australian and British citizenship, so, but I grew up in Australia. Well, I left, when I was quite young. I was only in my mid-20s when I left Australia, and I'd been working as a lawyer in Australia for just about 2-3 years at that stage. But it was very, I had a good job, I was actually living with a lovely man, I had lots of great friends, but I think I just thought, is this all there is? I wanted to explore the world, I wanted to explore my boundaries, I think, see if I could make it somewhere else. And I didn't visualise a life in Sydney of comfort and ease. I think I wanted to make my life more difficult, in essence. It was too easy, it was too comfortable. I don't know if it's economic and physical. I think it is more this feeling of wanting to test oneself against, the best and the greatest and the biggest challenges in the world, to actually say, well, as an Australian, can we make it somewhere else? Can we actually go out there and, cope beyond our shores? Because I think, we're a very protected society in Australia and it is quite cosy. And I think certainly that's my philosophy, and I think a lot of my friends that left at the same time as me had a very similar philosophy. We've discussed it since, and I think most people did feel this desire to have a challenge in their lives. I think it's a very comfortable existence. Now, that doesn't go necessarily back to a philosophy of, 50 years or 100 years or even longer, but I think certainly from the time that I left, from the 80s onwards, it's been a pretty comfortable existence in Australia, and I think people wanted to challenge it. I didn't plan to come to London. I didn't plan to come to London because it was a known entity to me. I had connections with London. I actually, perhaps in that sort of going back to the theme of earlier, I actually wanted to explore new boundaries, and that's why I went to America originally. I didn't leave Australia and come straight to London. I had no burning desire to come to London, in fact. And in fact, when I came to London, I burst into tears. When I came here from New York, I thought it was the most desperate, horrible place in the world, and I came here in 1988 and it was pretty dire, to be frank. I think Margaret Drappel's quote was applicable not only to London but to the whole of England at the time. I'm sorry, other way around, it was not only applicable to England but also to London. But then I think in the 90s, I think London got a really new lease of life, and I think now London is probably the most exciting city culturally, artistically, in many ways in the world. I think it, beats certainly Paris and New York and, other Western cities that I'm familiar with. I think it's, it's at the top of its game at the moment. So that's a reason to be here now, but it certainly wasn't why I came. Well, yeah, the best things, I think, it's almost the best and worst. It's the same, because I think it's a very tough and challenging place to live. I think it's a hard place to live, which makes it both good for me, because that's kind of what I wanted, but I think it also makes it difficult. It is absolutely the opposite of my memory of life in Sydney. It's tough because there are so many people. It's hard to, even public transport is tough here, particularly public transport is tough here. The roads are tough, they're crowded, it's dirty, it's a challenge. I think every day is a challenge. It's busy. There are pressures. It's a high pressured place. Here am I, this is meant to be talking about the best things. Okay, perhaps I've veered over to the worst things. The best things are that you have you know, the world at your fingertips. There's a vast array of cultures here. There's a vast array of culture here. I'm very interested in the arts. I like theatre, dance, movies, the visual arts of all descriptions, and you're not going to get any better than you get in London. And you know, a vast array of people who are very interesting. So I think that's the best thing about London. I think Australians are these days pretty much part of the furniture. When I left Australia and went to the States, that's when I felt special. I felt like an exotic flower in New York City. People were really interested in me as an Australian. They found the whole concept fascinating, and they wanted to know a lot about it. And then when I left New York and came to London, actually I felt diametrically, I had the diametric opposite treatment to that. I didn't feel special at all. I felt patronised, actually, when I came here in the late 80s. I felt like, oh, still that extraordinary thing of being somehow a colonial, which I absolutely was not seen as in the States at all. And I think now, actually, you know, Australians are more accepted, and in fact I think they're quite often welcomed. I mean, we have a lot of Australians that work now in the firm, and I think that's a lot to do with people see that Australians have, you know, a good work ethic. They're sort of cheerful. They get on with it. So actually, I think they have a probably better press now than they did, you know, 18 years ago. I don't mix hugely with Australians, so it isn't a question of necessarily ever being in that position. The only times I can think of it is if I go to Sydney. It's certainly true. You know, my mother won't hear a word against Australia. And I suppose it's probably a continuation of that cultural cringe, or maybe it is that the other half of it, the cultural strut. It's to say, well, we're a proud nation, we've accomplished a lot, we've got a place on the world stage, which, you know, I think is highly debatable, to be frank. But I think that's the perception from within Australia, that Australians do have a place on the world stage. So it's an insecurity, I guess, ultimately. Anything where you cannot criticise constructively, it's usually because the recipient of the criticism is insecure. And I think there still is an insecurity about being Australian. And it comes back to the, you know, distance and isolation and all the things that have always been there. It's probably, for Australians, I think it's all right for them to take the piss out of themselves, but for someone else not to take the piss out of them. So I think, but why? Why is that so? I mean, it probably comes back to the same answer, of feeling a little insecure about one's place in the world. I don't know. It's hard for me. I mean, you know, just talking about this, I think it is hard for me to actually say, do I think Australians are particularly smug? I think there is that feeling that Australia is, you know, very... I mean, I think this is the theme. This is the theme of what I'm saying throughout, is there is this feeling of it being a pretty fantastic place to live. And therefore, people that live in Australia, I suppose, perhaps they've got used to it. Perhaps they feel they deserve it. But I don't necessarily see that smugness, because I don't hang out with a whole lot of Australians, and I don't actually see a lot of new Australians coming, because, you know, I just live here. I mean, I've lived here for a long time. I've made my own way here, and yes, I have Australian friends, but it isn't like I move in a big gang of Australians. I think I have long stopped calling Australia home. For me, you know, home is where the heart is, rather than necessarily a nation, a sort of physical piece of earth. And do I think I will go back to Australia one of these days? I don't think about it, to be absolutely honest. I mean, I live with, you know, my partner is Dutch. I have two sons who are unequivocally English. They don't think of themselves as anything else but English. And whether I end up in Australia, I think, is anyone's guess. Certainly I have no plans at the moment. Guilt has never entered into my thinking, no. I mean, if anything, I feel like I had more opportunities by going abroad than I would have in Australia. And in some ways, I think, you know, growing up in Sydney, you get very much put into a stream, perhaps a stream of where you've come from, and therefore who you are. You know, you are defined by where you've come from. Perhaps I mean, as basic as whether you've come from the north side of the harbour or the south or the east side of the harbour or anywhere else connected with the harbour, and then you're kind of put into sort of social streams and therefore probably also economic and working streams as well. And it was, you know, I feel no guilt of breaking away from that and actually becoming me. I think leaving Australia, I became me. I think I would have been a very different person if I stayed in Australia. Most English would love to be able to go to Australia. I mean, many people do not understand why, you know, I left Australia and why I've stayed away from Australia for so long, because I think the things that they are intrigued by are all those lifestyle choices. They absolutely think the idea of beaches, weather, views, good food, you know, pleasant working existence are the be-all and end-all of life. And perhaps exactly the reason I left is the reason that most English people would like to go and live in Australia. So it's kind of fascinating in that way. I think as a sort of nation, the UK is a fairly negative place. But having said that, when you break it down to individuals, you know, I don't necessarily think my friends are negative types. On the whole, I think they're pretty positive about being able to get out there and do what they want to do. So I guess that's the way one copes with it, is you find people that you can relate to. I mean, the rest of it, in terms of getting from A to B and getting your way around London and coping with people that you meet in shops and restaurants, is just a question of being positive. I think continuing to be positive, which I am, and I think that is a very good Australian attribute. I think we're a very glass half full nation on the whole, and I think I'm a glass half full person, and I guess that's the way to cope with it. And perhaps also, you know, to go abroad as often as one can in holiday times. I don't spend too many of my holidays in England. The two things I really miss about Australia are my family. Although I see my family quite a lot, I think what I've missed is seeing my sister's children growing up. And I think, you know, because now I'm a visitor and I visit them or they might visit me. So I think that family connection and actually, you know, seeing my family expand and grow, I miss that. And I miss the sea. I miss being able to see the sea. And I still, you know, for my holidays, it's almost imperative that I go somewhere where I can see the sea, where I can hear the sea, where I can walk on a beach. Those things are really, I realise I've got sea in my veins. So that's the other thing I miss.